Hello everybody, good morning. My name is Dr. Athar Munir. Well, in my last lecture, I talked about Hamlet's madness in one of the most famous Shakespearean tragedy, Hamlet. Well, today the topic of discussion is Soliloquies by Hamlet. Before I move any further, let's have a look at the outline of today's lecture. Okay? Well, I'll start with an introduction of Soliloquy and then I'll move on to discuss its importance very briefly, and then I'll tell you about the soliloquies in the drama, that is Hamlet, and then I'll move on to discuss soliloquies by Hamlet, that is the central character, and then I will be analyzing them one by one and then we will conclude. Okay? So, let's begin. What is a soliloquy? A soliloquy actually, technically speaking, is thinking aloud on the stage. If some character is alone on the stage and he talks to himself loudly so that audience may listen to him or her, then technically speaking that would be a soliloquy. Now, what is its importance? Why is it used by dramatists? Now, soliloquies are a very powerful tool in the hands of a dramatist, and they are used to reveal the inner working of the mind of a character. And through the use of soliloquies, the dramatist lays bare the secret thoughts of the character, and the mental progress or deterioration of the character is revealed. It also contributes to the development of the plot by telling things happening off the stage. Moreover, there is an important thing. Soliloquy also sheds light on the character who is engaged in the soliloquies, and it also tells us about other characters who the principal character who is engaged in the soliloquy is talking about. And we must also keep one thing in mind, that when the character is talking to himself or herself, then his or her estimation of the other characters will not be biased one, or he or she will not be telling lies. So, we the viewers or we the audience have every reason to believe the report of that character. Now, use of soliloquies by Elizabethan dramatists. Now, you can see that Shakespeare was not the only one who used soliloquies in his dramas. There were other Elizabethan dramatists who used soliloquies, and I would like to give you the example of Christopher Marlowe, who you are familiar with, and you have already read the drama Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe, and in that drama he made an extensive use of soliloquies. Okay, you might remember the words of Dr. Faustus when he says, "Oh, what a word of profit, of power, of honor, of omnipotence is promised to the studious artisan. All things that move between the quiet poles shall be at my command. Emperors and kings are but obeyed in their several provinces, nor can they raise the wind or rend the clouds, but his dominion that stretcheth as far as doth the mind of man. A sound magician is a mighty God. Here, Faustus, tire thy brains to gain a deity." So, you have seen that through this soliloquy, Marlowe allows us to give us a peep into the mind of Dr. Faustus, and we get to know what he is thinking at that moment. So, Shakespeare, of course, was the greatest artist of not only Elizabethan times but of all times to come, and he made very skillful use of this dramatic device. And if they are removed from his tragedies, the plays would be left the poorer. Now, let's have a look at soliloquies in Hamlet. Before I move on to discuss the soliloquies in Hamlet, I would like to remind you that the name of the drama we are discussing at the moment is Hamlet, and the name of the principal character is also Hamlet. And there is another Hamlet, that is the senior Hamlet, the father of the Prince Hamlet, who has already died before the start of the play. When I say, or when someone says that Soliloquies in Hamlet, then he means to say that Soliloquies by all the characters in the drama. Okay. Now there are 11 Soliloquies in all in the drama. There are 7 Soliloquies by Hamlet, 3 Soliloquies by Claudius, that is the uncle of Hamlet, and then there is 1 Soliloquy by Ophelia, the beloved of Hamlet. Okay. I will not be discussing the Soliloquies of Claudius and Soliloquy by Ophelia, though are important in their own ways, and they shed light on their characters as well as on other characters, but the time is limited and I will be focusing my attention only and only on Soliloquies by the Prince Hamlet, the leading character in the play Hamlet. The first Soliloquy of Hamlet occurs in Act 1, Scene 2, and it starts with the word, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew." Now, in order to understand and appreciate this soliloquy or any other soliloquy, we need to have a look at the background of the soliloquy. So, this soliloquy takes place after King Claudius and Queen Gertrude urge Hamlet in the open court to cast off the deep melancholy which they believe has taken possession of his mind as a consequence of his father's death. In the opinion of the king and queen, Hamlet has already sufficiently grieved and mourned for his father. Prior to the soliloquy, King Claudius and Queen Gertrude has announced their marriage, and according to them, court could not afford excessive grief. This announcement sends Hamlet into a deep emotional spiral and inspires the soliloquy that follows. Now, in this soliloquy, Hamlet refers to the world as an unweeded garden in which rank and gross things grow in abundance. He bemoans the fact that he cannot commit suicide and explains that self-slaughter is not an option because it is forbidden by God. And in the first 2 lines of the soliloquy, he wishes that his physical self might cease to exist on his own without requiring him to commit a mortal sin. I said, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew." These are the first 2 lines of the soliloquy. And now, though he is saddened by his father's death, the larger cause of Prince Hamlet's misery is Queen Gertrude's disloyal marriage to his uncle. She announces the new marriage when barely a month has elapsed, and now Hamlet moans that even a beast would have mourned longer. Additionally, he considers his marriage to be an incestuous affair. Now, let me explain why this is incestuous affair, because according to the Christian norms, you cannot marry your brother's wife even after the brother is dead. So, Hamlet's father is dead and Hamlet's uncle Claudius marries Hamlet's father's wife, that is Hamlet's mother. So, this is an incestuous affair, and this is very, very upsetting for Hamlet. And now, what does this soliloquy tell us? This soliloquy tells us quite a few things about Hamlet and other characters. As I said, a soliloquy is a means of exploring the inner working of the mind of the character, and we get to know what is happening in the mind and soul of the character, and it also sheds light on other characters. So, first of all, it shows Hamlet's deep affection for late King Hamlet, and it also paints the dead king as a loving husband and respected father, and further demonstrates to the audience the hasty nature of Queen Gertrude's second marriage, which she announces without mourning for a respectable period of time. And Hamlet also scorns his mother and he says, frailty, thy name is woman. Here we see Hamlet's tendency to generalize things. He is upset with the frailty of his own mother, but he generalizes it and he says, frailty, thy name is woman. And he concludes the soliloquy by voicing his frustration that he must keep his objections to himself. And now let's move on to Hamlet's second soliloquy. Oh, all you host of heaven, oh earth, what else? And shall I couple hell? Oh fie, hold my heart. Now this soliloquy, second soliloquy by Prince Hamlet, occurs in Act 1 and Scene 5, right after the ghost of the dead king, senior Hamlet, or Hamlet's father, who has charged Hamlet with the duty of taking revenge upon his murderer. What kind of murder? That is a foul and most unnatural murder. The ghost of the king, dead king, tells Hamlet that as he slept in his garden, a villain poured poison into his ear. The ghost reveals the murder to Hamlet by saying, the serpent that did sting thy father's life now wears his crown. So this was the brief background of Hamlet's soliloquy. Now let's move on to analyze it. Now it reveals the fact that King Claudius is the real murderer of Hamlet's dead father. And Hamlet is stunned by the revelation and echoes of the ghost's word, asking him to remember it. It also reveals another important secret to Hamlet and carries his rage and grief. He is shocked, stunned, and in great grief upon realizing that his father was murdered by his own uncle, that is Claudius, who has now married his own mother, Hamlet's mother, and he promises to remember only ghost's commandment. He says, remember thee? Yeah, from the table of my memory I'll wipe away all trivial fond records. Now this soliloquy also sheds some more light on Hamlet's mother, when Hamlet refers to his mother as the most pernicious woman. And this soliloquy also sheds some more light on his own uncle, when he says about his uncle, a villain, a smiling damned villain. Now towards the end of the soliloquy, Hamlet swears to remember and obey the ghost. Now Hamlet's soliloquy, which starts with, so God be with you, now I am alone, oh what a rug and peasant slave am I. Now this soliloquy occurs in Act 2 and Scene 2. In this soliloquy, Hamlet accuses himself for his delay in executing the ghost's orders, and is very harsh on himself on the subject of ignoring duty, and he calls himself a dull and muddy-mettled rascal. I say it again, a dull and muddy-mettled rascal. And he also calls himself a coward and declares that he should act and not like a whore unpack my heart with words and fall a cursing like a very drab. He gives vent to his anger for Claudius by saying, a bloody body villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain. The plan moves further and Hamlet tries to enact the mousetrap. You might remember that mousetrap is the trap which Hamlet lays to catch his uncle Claudius. So now Hamlet's fourth soliloquy, to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. Now this desperate question, to be or not to be, occurs in Act 3, Scene 1, and it is the most famous and celebrated because of its philosophical nature, questioning life and death and existence. Hamlet's dilemma is whether it is worth to exist, and he weighs life's worth against the nothingness of non-existence as he toys with the idea of suicide. He wonders which is more appropriate given his desperate situation, to die and end his suffering, thus avoiding the cruelties of fate, or to put up a fight against the misfortunes of life. In considering the former, Hamlet states, to die and end the heartache, to die and end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep. But when Hamlet considers the consequences of death and afterlife, he begins to examine the other option, that is life. He questions whether death is in fact an end to all his troubles, or if perhaps things may become worse as he is forced to reflect on all of the misdeeds and crimes he has committed throughout his life. He turns over the idea of death and questions if it is truly an eternal sleep or a hellish and unceasing restlessness. His obstacles, like all who contemplate death, is his fear of the unknown. In essence, dead men tell no tales. Thus, no matter how hard we try, man will never know what comes after the end of our life. He ruminates, he thinks on this idea, thinking out loud. But that the dread of something after death, that undiscovered country from whose bournes no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make coward of us all.